This is our Anatomy and Physiology, Unit 1. In this unit, we look at medical terminology, and we're also going to look at the organization of our bodies. So we're going to explain the difference between anatomy and physiology to start. Anatomy is the structure of the body, so it's the what and where. Physiology, on the other hand, is the function of the body, the how and why. We need to look at directional terms. The reason we look at directional terms is to describe placement and structures in the body. First, looking at the skeleton. The axial skeleton is the head and the trunk of the body. The appendicular skeleton are the appendages, the arms and the legs. Also, it's important to note that this includes the hip girdle. So when we're talking about anatomical position, we're going to talk about an individual that is standing erect, facing forward, arms at the side, and the palms and toes are directed forward. So we can see two pictures here. The superior position would be anything towards the head. Inferior would be anything towards the feet. Anterior or ventral would be belly side. Dorsal or posterior would be the back side. Proximal is near attachment. So near to the point of attachment would be the hip for the leg, or it could be the shoulder for the arm. Distal is away from the point of attachment. We do have a midline that runs right down the middle of the body. The center of the body is the medial portion. Anything away from the medial line would be lateral. I always remember lateral based on playing football. If you're running a lateral play, you're running towards the sideline. Anytime we say the terms right or left, we're talking about the right or left of the individual in which we're looking at. It is not our right or our left. It's the individual that we are either if you're a surgeon operating on or if we're doing some type of dissection, it would be that organism's right or left side. So going through these one more time, anterior is the same thing as ventral. It's located towards the front. Posterior or dorsal is located towards the back. The medial line is that central portion of the body near the midline of the body. Lateral would be anything away from the midline. Again, proximal and distal. Proximal is located closer to the trunk or to the point of attachment of an arm or a leg. Or we could even talk about proximal for the head. Proximal would be closer to the neck, would be close to the point of attachment, whereas the top of the head would be distal. It would be located farther from the trunk. Superficial versus deep. Anytime we have a superficial cut, it would be right at the surface. A deep cut would be much deeper into the skin, even all the way in towards the bone or into the muscle. So superficial is located near to the surface of the body. Deep is farther from the surface of the body. Superior and inferior. Superior is located above or towards the head. Inferior is located below or towards the feet. It's important that we talk about homeostasis in this class and understanding feedback loops. So homeostasis is the body's attempt to maintain some type of constant internal environment. Some examples could be temperature, pH, or glucose concentrations. There are positive feedback loops and there are negative feedback loops that help to maintain homeostasis. A negative feedback loop is a mechanism that is activated by a surplus imbalance and acts to correct it by stopping the process that brought about the surplus. So for example, sweating. The surplus is heat in your body. Your body is trying to do something different to counteract that imbalance. The same thing with shivering. You're extremely cold, your body is trying to do something to counteract that temperature difference. A positive feedback loop, on the other hand, is a mechanism that is activated by a surplus imbalance, and it acts to correct it by increasing the process that brought about the surplus until a significant reaction brings about its end. So, for example, childbirth and the release of a number of hormones in the process of childbirth. Hormones are continued to be released until what's bringing about the imbalance, the fact that the child is about to be born, is corrected. And that would be the point in which the child is born. A fever would be another example of a positive feedback loop. Your body is going to increase temperature until it gets to the point in which the process that brought about the surplus is completely reduced. We're going to talk about the levels of organization in the body in this section. Our bodies are organized by the most simple form being the organelle. Organelles are arranged into cells, so there's a bunch of different organelles with differing jobs that create the cells. There are many different cells with different jobs. The conglomeration of cells together with differing jobs creates tissues. The organization of a number of tissues creates organs. Our organs are organized into organ systems, like the circulatory system, the digestive system, the respiratory system, the nervous system, and all of those systems in our body are organized into the organism. There are three distinct body planes. The frontal plane is a cut that divides the body lengthwise. It would give the anterior and posterior divisions of the body. The transverse plane is a body plane that would be cut horizontally to give a cross section. And then the sagittal plane divides the body lengthwise. This sagittal plane would be right down the midline. Our bodies have various functions. There are a number of different systems that have these functions. We're going to talk about those. The first is the integumentary system. That includes your hair, skin, and nails. Its main job is for external support and protection. The skeletal system. It is responsible for support and protection. It also aids in body movement, and it also produces blood cells. Your bones also act as a location for ligament attachment for locomotion. The muscular system. The muscular system aids in movement. It also allows us to produce heat to maintain some form of homeostasis. It includes skeletal muscles, smooth muscles, and cardiac muscles. Our nervous system is responsible for the regulation of body activities. It also helps us to learn and gives us memory. It includes the brain, the nerves, and the spinal cord. The endocrine system includes the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the testes, and ovaries, depending upon the sex of the individual. It is responsible for secreting hormones. These hormones are responsible for chemical regulation. The respiratory system. This system is responsible for the exchange of gases between the external environment and our blood. It includes the mouth, the lungs, and the alveoli. The alveoli are the small openings inside of the lung where gas exchange takes place. The cardiovascular system is responsible for transporting nutrients. Those nutrients are moved to body cells. It also then transports waste away from those cells. It includes the heart, blood, arteries, and veins. The lymphatic system is the system that is responsible for immunity. It also helps in the process of the absorption of fats. It helps to drain the tissues of fluid. It includes the spleen, the lymph nodes, the thymus, and the red bone marrow. The digestive system is responsible for the absorption and breakdown of food. It includes the mouth, stomach, and the intestines. The reproductive system is responsible for the production of the sperm and the eggs. It includes the organs, the penis or the vagina, and the testes or the ovaries. The urinary system is responsible for the maintenance of volume and chemical composition of blood. It includes the kidneys, the bladder, and the urethra. Kidneys are responsible for the removal of ammonia from the body. The ammonia is converted to uric acid and stored inside of the bladder. As uric acid builds up, it's detrimental to cells. And so our body adds water to it to dilute uric acid, and that occurs within the bladder, and then eventually it is expelled from the body. There are 3 different body types. The first is the ectomorph. These individuals usually have a delicate frame. They're kind of that classic hard gainer. They don't typically gain weight. Typically their chest is flat. Small shoulders, they're thin, usually have a very lean muscle mass. They typically find it very difficult to gain weight, and we usually categorize them as having a fast metabolism. The endomorph is usually an individual that has soft or a round body. They gain muscle and fat very easily. Typically we call these individuals short and stocky. They typically have a hard time losing fat as well, and we would categorize them as having a slow metabolism. In between the two is the mesomorph. These are the individuals that we typically think of as having an athletic build. They typically have hard body definition, usually a lot of muscle definition. Typically it's a rectangular body shape. They are usually strong. They gain muscle easily. And typically they gain fat more easily than ectomorphs, but not quite as much as our endomorphs. There are a number of anatomical regions that we need to point out. The abdominal pelvic quadrants are broken up into the left and right upper quadrants and the left and right lower quadrants. We also have abdominal pelvic regions, the right hypochondriac region and the left hypochondriac region are towards the top, right at the ribs. In between the two is the epigastric region. The next region down is the right lumbar region and the left lumbar region. In between the two is the umbilical region. And then we have the right and left inguinal regions. And between the two is the hypogastric or pubic region. We can take the quadrants and the regions and overlap them in order to get a better reference of locations of organs within the body. So the usefulness of quadrants or regions results from the known relationships between superficial anatomical landmarks and underlying organs. We can use the terms anterior or ventral and posterior or dorsal as well to identify anatomical relationships. Our organs are in chambers within the body called body cavities. There are 2 major functions to these body cavities. They help to protect delicate organs, gives them cushioning, and they also permit significant changes in size and shape of the internal organs. The central body cavity is also known as the coelom. The coelom develops early in development. It contains the respiratory, cardiovascular, digestive, urinary, and reproductive systems. The diaphragm separates the 2 portions of the ventral body cavities, into the superior thoracic cavity and the inferior abdominal pelvic cavity. Inside of the thoracic cavity, we have the pleural cavity and the pericardial cavity. The pericardial cavity encloses the heart. The pleural cavity includes the respiratory system. Right here would be the diaphragm separating the thoracic cavity from the inferior abdominal pelvic cavity. That includes the peritoneal cavity, the abdominal cavity, and the pelvic cavity. So all three of those are portion of the abdominal pelvic cavity. Internal organs within these cavities are called viscera. The membrane that surrounds the cavity is the serous membrane. Any serous membrane that surrounds visceral organs is called the visceral layer. And the layer that lines the inner surface of the body wall is called the parietal layer. So focusing in on the thoracic cavity. The thoracic cavity contains 3 internal chambers. It includes a single pericardial cavity and 2 pleural cavities. So the heart is the cavity where, the pericardial cavity is the cavity where the heart is housed. The serous membrane around the heart is called the pericardium. So peri meaning around, cardium means heart. The layer covering the heart is the visceral pericardium. Opposite the heart is the parietal pericardium. So we can see in this picture the visceral pericardium is the membrane that is surrounding and in contact with the heart. The pericardial cavity, the empty space of this membrane, is here. And then the parietal pericardium is on the outside away from that organ. This can be thought of like a balloon with a fist in it. Anything that's in contact with the fist would be equivalent to the visceral pericardium. Anything that was away would be the parietal pericardium. The empty space in the middle would be the pericardial cavity. The mediastinum surrounds the pericardial cavity. The pleural cavity surrounds the lung. And again, the serous membrane lining the pleural cavity is the pleura. The visceral pleura covers the outer surface of the lung. And then the parietal pleura covers the opposite side or the opposing surface of the mediastinum. We can see the mediastinum labeled here. In this picture, we also see the pleural cavity. The parietal pleura would be away from the lung. And the pericardial cavity is here. And finally, we have the abdominal pelvic cavity. We're going to first focus on the superior abdominal cavity. It contains the liver, stomach, spleen, small intestine, and most of the large intestine. The peritoneal cavity has a serous membrane surrounding the cavity that is called the peritoneum. The parietal peritoneum lines the inner surface of the body wall. Again, the term parietal is going to be away from the organs. The visceral peritoneum covers the enclosed organs. In the inferior pelvic cavity, we have the distal portion of the large intestine, the urinary bladder, and the various reproductive organs. It's important to note here that when we're talking about various reproductive organs, there are going to be more housed in the female sex than there are in the male sex. In the male sex, the reproductive organs, the testes, are going to be external of the body along with the penis.